Former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney joins us right now. He's the co-chair of the Actum Strategic Advisors and former President Biden Treasury official. Kitty Richards, good morning to both of you. Mick, you know, we went back and forth with Senator Warren about a wealth tax. I'm curious, if you sort of take the wealth tax and put it almost to the side, one of the other things we talked about was just the potential of taxing folks who effectively take loans against their assets to avoid taxes. And that was something that she said it wasn't exactly what she'd want, but it might be a way of capturing some of that tax. And I think capturing sort of the spirit, if you will, of the way taxes are supposed to go in the United States. But maybe you have a different view.
No, yeah, sort of. Obviously, do I have a different view than Elizabeth Warren? Probably most of the time. But I saw the interview, and she was going down that road to say, look, let's try and figure out a way to stop people from borrowing against their assets, not realizing any income. And then she went from there, and I thought that was a reasonable conversation, immediately into a wealth tax. Those two things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. My guess is she's sort of going through the mental gymnastics on this idea of preventing people from borrowing against assets, getting money without paying tax on it, and using that as an excuse to do what she really wants to do, which is sort of soak the rich. Look, if she'd come out and the next thing out of her mouth was, why don't we take away the deductibility of interest on those types of loans, maybe that's a conversation where you can find some middle ground. But I don't think that's where Senator Warren wants to go. She's looking for an excuse to do the wealth tax that she's wanted to do for a long time.
Kitty, are you in that same place? Do you think that are you a fan of a broader wealth tax?
What I'd really like to see is for us to make sure that we address the underlying issues that Senator Warren was talking about, which is the fact that over the past 40 years, we've run a massive experiment in trickle-down economics where we have serially cut taxes on the wealthiest and large corporations. And what we've seen is stagnant wages, middling growth, and skyrocketing inequality and real concentration of power within our economy. The tax system used to play the role of checking some of that, but our inability to get at folks who hold their money in assets over the long term and who are able to use accounting gimmicks to access that cash without ever paying tax on it is a real fundamental problem for our tax system, and it's throughout the code. And so, you know, I think it's a little bit silly to call this mental gymnastics when what we're trying to do is find some way to get at the fundamental unfairness of our current tax code and rebalance economic power in the economy.
Hey, Mick, do you think that the tax code is fundamentally unfair?
No, I think taxing income is fair. I don't like it necessarily, but it is legal, and we've been doing it now for 100 years. I think what they're trying to do is use the circumstances to get what they've always wanted, which is it's not about fairness, it's about envy. Keep in mind, what I don't like about the tax code, Andrew, is that roughly half the people in the country don't pay it. You heard Senator Warren talk about the rich not being represented in Congress. That's not the billionaires and the upper 1/10 of 1%. It's the half of the people in this country who pay taxes on income and the other half who don't. That's the concern you've got, is you end up in a situation where more people are voting to tax somebody else. That's fundamentally unfair.
Mick,
that's inequitable.
In terms of where we are right now, by the way, with this bill about funding Israel and Ukraine and the like, yeah, and having a pay-for, are you, as somebody who cares about budgets, do you like the idea that the pay-for comes from effectively defunding the IRS?
I like the idea there's a pay-for. I happened to disagree with Senator Roger Marshall last week when he said he didn't care how it got paid for. What I was waiting for him to say is, so long as it gets paid for. He didn't go there. Listen, one of the reasons you get $33 trillion in debt is that both parties have an attitude in this town that some things are simply too important not to do, that we can't afford not to do it. We've used that language here for much too long. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, we have extraordinary expenses. Let's figure out what other things we won't need to do in order to pay for that. That is not the wrong conversation to have in Washington on Israel, on Ukraine, on Taiwan, on anything.
But the idea of defunding the IRS, I mean, look, there's a view among some Republicans that you want to defund the IRS because you effectively want to starve the government of money. There's another view that you know has been put out there, I think, potentially unfairly, but I'm sure you can disagree, that it's going to be used and targeted against people politically. We have police in this country, most of whom are, I think, great patriots who do a great job. And there's some bad apples who do some bad things. And there's been arguments about defunding the police, but I don't think you're on the side of defunding the police because of the bad apples.
Now, on the IRS thing, there's probably a little bit of truth in all of that. You could have that debate. I'm coming at it from a different perspective. It's a little more boring, geek inside the Beltway perspective with my old director of the Office of Management and Budget hat on. The reason it's in there is it's a gimmick. We knew how to do this. We just chose not to do it when I ran the Office of Management and Budget. The way that they count is that if you give another $1 to the IRS, it'll bring in another $1.20 or whatever. There's a formula they use. So the more money you say you're spending on the IRS, the more money you say you're bringing in, and that's how you sort of pay for the other stuff you want to spend money on. And I always thought that was a gimmick. That's one of the reasons I don't like the IRS program.
Right.
I'd like to cut in there and correct the record on a couple of things. First of all, using the IRS cuts as a pay-for is a gimmick. It is absolutely the case that if you invest in enforcement against wealthy tax cheats, you bring in more money than you spend on IRS enforcement. You also, by the way, improve service for the millions and millions of American taxpayers who pay their taxes every year and currently have to do it through corporations that extract profit and sell their data to other major corporations for advertising purposes against their will. Also, it is offensive to pretend that half of Americans do not pay taxes. The individual income tax is one slice of the way that we fund our government. American workers pay payroll taxes. American workers pay sales taxes. They pay property taxes, whether they own or rent their home. And these taxes are higher than the taxes that the wealthiest people in this country pay across the board. I think it is completely unacceptable to keep this old saw going about makers and takers. And frankly, the American people they see right through it.
Andrew, you know where I'm going with that. Your payroll taxes go for your Social Security and your Medicare and your Medicaid. Your property taxes go for the stuff back home. Your sales taxes go for your stuff back home. I'm talking about the federal income tax, which goes to run everything behind me in this town. Everything in this nation that the federal government does is paid for primarily out of the individual income tax that half of the people in this country don't pay for. They're getting their national defense for free. They're getting the Department of Education for free. That's unfair. Look, can we go to a flat tax and have Jeff Bezos pay a higher percentage of his tax rate? Let's have that conversation as long as everybody has some skin in the game. Right now, you've got half the people in the country who get their federal government for free.
Excuse me, saying that your property taxes go to things back home and then talking about the Department of Education. The things back home are teachers who are also funded through the Department of Education. And the reason that you don't want to talk about teachers or cancer research or Social Security and the importance of backstopping that for all of the working people across the country who do pay into the system but are currently facing economic precarity while others soak up profits and hold them in intergenerational wealth without ever paying taxes. The reason you don't want to talk about those specifics is all of those things are popular and they are things that people want the federal government to invest in. And the American people understand that the rich and corporations are not paying their fair share, especially after the Trump tax cuts.